So Mark is going to be presenting. Where are you here? Let's see. Was the Shroud of Turin invisibly rewoven with foreign material as at the radiocarbon site to match the rest of the cloth? And so, did I say that right? Is that good enough? Well, they'll figure it out anyway as soon as you start. So, yeah. Okay. Are you mic'd? Go ahead and give it a test.
You can all hear me, can't you?
We can. Let's
give Mark
a hand. Give him a hand.
I've been given 20 minutes, and I can't possibly cover all the quotes we've had in the last hour and a half. But I couldn't agree more that something very questionable and problematic exists with the very aberrant 1988 radiocarbon dating. And I thought the repair hypothesis is what it was originally called. And then 2 years later, a couple years later, it was called the reweave hypothesis. It's a very intriguing hypothesis. I have nothing against the hypothesis. I think it should be tested and tested further. This hypothesis originally caused a stir in Italy, and then when Ray Rogers started publishing his findings between 2001 and 2005, it caused a real stir, and it gave a lot of people, got a lot of people behind it. But this hypothesis has been tested far more than you realize. It caused, this contributed to the 2002 restoration of the Shroud and re-examination of the Shroud, and it caused a lot of STURP scientists to look at the test results that they got from 1978, and it caused even more tests to be done with the radiocarbon sample that was down in Arizona as well. And so I'm got the task of telling you about what actual evidence do you have on the cloth of any repair. And it's not that I don't think the dating is inaccurate. I just think this particular hypothesis has no evidence and is extremely unlikely, regardless of how intriguing the hypothesis is. And I don't know if I can overcome in 18 minutes or whatever I've got left, but I'll give it a shot. This is the area. You can see where the A1 through A2 samples were taken. The two smaller ones went to Arizona, bigger ones went to Zurich and Oxford. The dark area at the top is the Reyes area. They're all from the same area. I'll just try to, I originally thought I was going to have a half hour, so I'm just going to have to go as much as I can here. But when you take, Joe described Ray Rogers' findings. He summarized them pretty well. If the Shroud, if you took a repair piece, if that Reyes sample is, his samples say they're all dyed in the repair pieces and the radiocarbon sample too, if you took them out and repaired them, you should be able on some type of examination of the cloth to see that. 6 different close-up examinations have occurred with the Shroud since 1969. You've got 69, 73, 78, you've got 88, you've got 97, you've got 2002. 2002, they removed the backing cloth and look all over. You've got scores of experts. You had 5,000 to 7,000 photographs taken at various magnifications, and at every wavelength feasible to test the whole shroud. And of course, you look at areas. Let me start with one, and that was the radiographs that were mentioned. The radiographs, I've seen this with John Jackson just last March. He has a radiograph that goes right through that area. And it's the same radiograph that appears in a 1982 publication. And because of the high and low density bands that go right on through the main part of the cloth and the area that 10 years later would be the radiocarbon dating and into the side seam, the authors themselves conclude this is all one part of the cloth, including the side strip. And it was very logical. In that same paper is a study of the X-ray fluorescence samples. The Reyes area, the orange color or the rust colored, the X-ray fluorescence analysis of the calcium, the strontium, and iron is the same relative concentrations as the rest of the cloth. No 16th century reweaver is going to find material that matches that precisely when it would be centuries before they would even know what these chemical elements are, let alone their content on the shroud. That wouldn't be known until the early 1980s when they could examine these samples that they took in '78. Both of these papers appear in an article that summarizes Sturp's findings. The paper was written by Larry Schwalbe and Raymond Rogers. Ray, one of the problems with his well-known 2005 paper, but his other work too, is he doesn't conduct any elemental analysis of these samples. He has samples, 14 samples. He unfortunately was away from shroud work for close to 20 years. He was a chemist at Los Alamos. He never undertook any elemental analysis of these samples and essentially looked through a microscope. The one arguably paralysis mass spectrometry test that he included in his analysis was an unpublished test by Sturp, and that indicates a furfural content that could easily be accounted for by a scorch. And in fact, in the re-examination of the test results from 1978, Vernon Miller, who was the chief photographer of the Sturp research team, looks at reflected imagery and ultraviolet fluorescence photographs. And this is in 1989, right after radiocarbon. He said this is in a scorch area. Alan Adler, who makes a lot of quotes that Joe accurately gave, and they're over different times than that, but Ray completely misses his chemical analysis. The chemical analysis of the entire shroud and all these, the entire chapter in my 2015 book is devoted to this. He says all the off water stain area, off scorch marks, just regular background parts of the cloth, the chemistry is the same. But when you get into the scorches and water stain area, of course, they're going to give you a different chemistry. And he says in several works, the radiocarbon sample is in the midst of a scorch mark and a water stain. And you could see that on one of Joe's photos, but I'll show you here. See, that water stain goes right into the radiocarbon area. It's right on the edge of a water stain. And on the edge of a water stain is where all the things that they picked up on the flow is going to deposit. That's all he's saying. And to construe that as a repair or a reweave is not, I mean, you could hypothesize that, but it doesn't test out when you test it. He makes a lot of subjective findings and makes great leaps in his logic. And he simply ignores elemental analysis. And it's unfortunate, but he does. There's, I can only give you a highlight of the things that have gone on, that have went. In 1988, Mechtild Fleury Lamberg sent me those photos. These are the backside. You don't see a repair or a change of cloth in there. Linen does not accept dye very well at all. If you had to dye this area perfectly in the 1500s, how's it going to stay the same color? Dye is going to flake off and get lighter, and the shroud itself is going to darken and get more sepia or straw yellow color over time. By the way, that water stain that we saw earlier, even the most ardent advocates of the repair hypothesis don't think that that the repair took place before 1532. No one advocates that they put a reweave in there and then dyed the reweave to perfectly match the water stain. Well, subsequent research has shown that these water stains at the bottom are not from the 1532 fire. Now, I don't know. Obviously, we weren't there. But at the earliest it would have to be, the latest it could have been was 1531. This invisible reweave just supposedly starts in the 16th century. I might add there's a lot of could've and would've and could be done and things like these statements, but there's not one historical example. And other people have studied this, and the woman that led the 2002 re-examination of the shroud says, well, sure, there's so-called invisible reweaves, but it's just invisible to the naked eye. They're always revealed upon close examination. They would be revealed upon microscopic examination, especially thousands of photographs, photomicrographs that were taken of every inch of the shroud, every fraction of an inch, every bit on there. It is an excellent hypothesis, and we should continue to study and test this hypothesis some more, but it doesn't hold up when you test it out. In 2010, the sample from Arizona was put under ultraviolet lighting. And Timothy Joel, who was one of the radiocarbon scientists, says it does not fluoresce like paint or any coating at all. And when you compare the fluorescence of other dyed material, it all fluoresces completely different. Fleury Lamberg also put ultraviolet lighting, fluorescent lighting on repairs, on mendings. And the mending even shows up under this kind of lighting. It's hard to believe that no one would see this. And when they say invisible in this invisible mending process, they do not mean that it's just forever invisible. This part of the shroud was on a spool for 424 years. It was rolled on a spool. And when it used to go on exhibitions, it would go on tours for weeks at a time. Every night you'd have to take it down. When it rained, you'd have to take it down. You'd have to either re-roll it, refold it. You see all the pictures that Russ had up where they're holding it at this area? Where there's all kinds of repairs there. They're very, very noticeable, but he's holding it in all that area. All of these areas are taken after it's put on a spool and after it was invisibly rewoven. You wouldn't see a trace of any unraveling. And Ray Rogers says it's an end-to-end splice that was done in medieval times, and I have a picture of the splice for you. That's his picture, and you can see the right third is white, and the left 2/3 is yellow. The white has unraveled or popped out of the straw yellow color. But follow the ends, they go right on to the end of the cloth, just like the straw yellow one does to the other end. It's not an end-to-end splice. It's, in fact, when Robert Villarreal, who makes an accurate quote before he ever tests these, he did elemental analysis. It's about, all the words are 2 lines long. He says they're the same chemical composition at each end. It's not a splice. And moreover, he says they're both cotton. Now, why would you use cotton and make an end-to-end cotton splice of a linen fiber or a linen thread? Well, of course you wouldn't. And the fact that cotton's on the shroud has been known since Gilbert Reyes in 1973. He simply attributed it to the fact that looms wove cotton, linen, and all kinds of things. You're going to get different forms of materials on there. It doesn't mean, it's not ipso facto that it's a repair. Oh boy. In 2002, when they also talk about the repairs, and when they talk about the repairs, it's the front side. Recently, this was examined with modern techniques. This is what the backside looks like. Now, the backside, I assure you, when they removed the radiocarbon sample, if there was an invisible reweave there, they would have noticed it. You know how many people was around? And they did examine it with cameras and everything, and there's 16 hours of examination on film. Somebody would have saw that. This is what a modern reweave, invisible reweave looks on the backside. Somebody would have noticed it at the laboratories or in Turin. And there's just no evidence. I am out of time. This is a modern reweave using 16th century techniques, and you can use magnifying glasses today, but which they wouldn't have had in those days. Now the front is respectable, but I could still see with my own naked eye. But there's no question if the backside looks like that. So far, it's extremely unlikely. I think she said the photo is, this is a reweave. That's a Shroud fiber from Ray Rogers. That's a Shroud photo of the radiocarbon site, and this is the back side and the front side, and you see those threads just keep on going. The question was, do I have any photos from the Shroud? Oh, other mending? No, but other mending, I assure you, is very visible with the naked eye, and very, very visible. In fact, there's no historical record of an actually invisible reweave that can't be detected with close examination with the naked eye, or with a magnifying glass, or with microphotography, or with all kinds of other photographs and instrumentations taken. It's just, you don't have to prove a negative. If you're going to offer a hypothesis, a quick examination, like I'm an attorney, if the issue was whether my client was ever married, his testimony that he was never married is sufficient. I don't have to have documentation from every court in the world that says he was never married there. If someone's going to say he was married, they have to offer evidence that he was married. You can't prove a negative, and that's, it's up on the burden is upon those who make the hypothesis that there's a repair here to show some evidence on the cloth or on the sample that withstands any kind of elemental analysis.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark.
We're 5 minutes late, so.
Hello? Oh. Testing. Hello, there we are. So thank you, Mark. That was very good. And just to let you know that there are always two sides to every story, and sometimes even more. And we're going to go into a break right now, and we're going to come back here in about 15